Okay, hello. Welcome to another Instrument Racks video. I did create a basic Instrument Racks video, which you should watch before this one. And this is going to go into more advanced features on instrument racks. So I'm starting with the instrument rack that I set up in the previous video. I've got 4 chains, each with a device, each with a MIDI instrument, followed by an effect device. And then the last thing I did at the end of the first video was that I added a MIDI effect to chain 1. So we've got this nice chord effect on our analog device. Let's add a few extra tones to that now. So just to thicken that up a little bit, that's quite nice. Okay, so I think what I'll do is go and add a few more MIDI effects now. Let's see if I can add... Tell you what I'll do actually, I'll add an arpeggiator in after this chord device. Alright, so I'm playing a chord there on my keyboard, and this chain is being arpeggiated. I might add another arpeggiator, I think, let's add it to this operator chain. Okay, and because I've got the chord MIDI effect here on the analog chain, that means that I've got quite a few more notes being arpeggiated, but on the operator chain, I don't have the chord MIDI effect, so it's just the notes that I'm playing with the keyboard that are being arpeggiated. I'll just choose a random style here, and I'm also going to change the rate, so we've got 2 separate rates. Tell you what, why don't we just solo these 2 chains so we can just hear those. And I'm going to quicken up the analog arpeggiator. Okay, and now you can ring Hans Zimmer and ask him for a job. Right, so we've got some MIDI effects happening now on our chains, and now let's start to look into the instrument rack features in a little bit more detail. So you may have noticed that, just zoom in, you may have noticed that so far this hide button has been switched on, but there are 3 other options. There are chain, velocity, and key. So let's have a look at what they do. Now, if you've watched the audio effect rack video, you will have seen me interact with this, which is the chain selector. So let's just look at what we can do with it. If I select the top chain and shift select the bottom chain, and then move my cursor until this bracket style thing appears, I can click and drag these blue bars out. I can also right click, by the way, and select a medium or a large display for this. So let's keep it on, let's just keep it on medium, let's not go too daft. So we can see it in a little bit more clarity. And we can right click and we can distribute ranges equally. So again, if you watch the audio effect rack video, you'll know this. But what this does is this, based on the position of this blue bar, which is called the chain selector, this decides how the MIDI signal flows through the different devices on the different chains. So we've got, at the minute, I've got all of these chains switched on, but if I trigger the instrument rack, we only hear the analog chain because of the position of the chain selector. If I move it along here, we only hear the collision chain. Here, we hear the operator chain, and here, we hear electric. So you may want to trigger your chain with either by playing it live or with a MIDI clip like so. I'm just going to run that again, and I'm going to move this chain selector so you can see what happens. Okay, I have to say I don't like any of these sounds, but I haven't put any work into making any of these sounds sound good. If you watch the first video, you will have seen that I just brought the default versions of all of these sounds in. Never mind, we're just looking at how instrument racks work. So another thing that we can do is we can overlap these bars. By the way, they're all moving because I've got all of the chains selected. If I just have one chain selected and move one of those bars, they won't all move. You have to have all of them selected, for which you just select one and then hold down shift and select the other one, and then you can make them overlap pretty easily. And we can set fades between them by manipulating this light blue bar at the top. I'm just going to select that one chain and bring that one back because I don't want to fade there and I don't want to fade here either, so let's bring that back. All right, so now what's going to happen is we're going to fade between timbres rather than stepping between. Okay, so two different ways of changing between sounds, but those sounds are being triggered by the same either MIDI clip, or of course you could play live as well if you wanted to. So now that we've done that, I actually just want to undo all of this so that we are hearing all of the chains simultaneously again, because I want to look at velocity now. Okay, so it's the same sort of visual setup, but this time it's red. And what this allows us to do is only trigger certain chains based on the velocity of the MIDI notes. So we're going to have to go into the MIDI clip now. And I'll tell you what, just to simplify things, I'm going to set the loop brace to just 1 bar. And I need to do some editing of these MIDI velocities. So I'll tell you what, we'll turn this one up really high, that one really low, get that one really medium, and then maybe just alternate these a little bit. All right, so I don't know what the end result's going to be, but nevertheless, we'll see how this works in instrument racks. So you can set a range here for each chain. So for example, if we move this range to 56, that means that only MIDI notes that have a velocity of between 1 and 56 are going to pass through this chain. And if we put that there, only MIDI notes which have a velocity of between 56 and 127 are going to pass through the second chain. So why don't we distribute the ranges equally again, because that gives us a very simple way of visualizing what's happening, and we'll just run the sequencer and see what happens. Okay, so we've got a visual indicator of the velocity of each successive note up at the top here. There it is. And the timbre is changing based on the velocity of the note, because if the velocity is between 1 and 32, it only goes through this chain. If it's between 32 and 63, it only goes through this chain, and so on and so forth. And of course, you can overlap them as well and set fades as we did before with the chain selector. Okay, so let's undo all of that again so we can move on to this, which is key. And this enables us to do the same thing as we did with the chain selector and with velocity, except this time it's based on the pitch of the notes. So why don't we distribute the ranges equally one more time? Anything between C-2 and what is this, G0 is going to pass through this chain. Anything in this MIDI note range through the second chain, anything in this MIDI note range through the third, and so on and so forth. And again, you can make them overlap and make them crossfade. So if I go back to the MIDI clip, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to select all of my notes and bring the velocity up to full so we don't have any difference in the velocity. Actually, I'll tell you what, let's bring the velocity down to there so it matches the rest of the notes there. And with this one here, and then we'll extend the loop brace to 2 bars. So what we've got at the minute is we've got notes between C1 here and C3 here. Now if we go back over to here, we'll see that that will only actually trigger this device, this collision device, because the device lives on this collision chain, which has a MIDI note range which goes between G sharp 0 and D sharp 3, and all of our MIDI notes fall within this range. Okay, so with this MIDI clip, only this chain is being triggered. So why don't we, how should I do this? Let's think about this. I'm going to duplicate this clip a few times, 4 times. On this first clip, I'm going to go in and I'm going to change, I'll just zoom in here so I can see a little bit better. I'm going to select all the notes, and then I'm going to hold shift and arrow down until this starts. Now that's going to start really, really low at C-2 and probably sound pretty daft, but I'm not too bothered about that. I'll tell you what, actually, I like that first clip now more than the others, so I'll delete the rest and we'll just start with this first clip and I'll duplicate it. So now I'm working with this second clip down, click in here, Command and A to select all, and then shift and arrow up, and we'll start this at, say, C1. Will that do it? Yep. And then we'll duplicate this one more time and select all the notes and put those up to C3. Yeah, so that should just about do it. And then last but not least, duplicate this clip and move these notes up to, let's go all the way up to C6. Now, I just want to preface this by saying that it's probably not going to sound great, but it will show you how this works. The last thing I want to do, in order for these clips to play through in order, is I want to change follow actions. So I've just selected one clip there and held shift and selected the bottom one there. And if I turn on this little button here, L I guess stands for launch. Yes, it does, because here are the launch options. And I'm going to change the follow actions. I have done a video on follow actions, so have a look elsewhere, either on the YouTube channel or on stream, wherever you're watching, for information on that. That should do it. Actually, no, it won't, because I need to set this to 2 bars, because all of the clips are 2 bars long. Right, let's see what happens. Right, getting a little bit too high there now, isn't it? Nevertheless, it worked. We set our ranges for our individual chains, and then we gave it MIDI notes which only occupied certain ranges, and so only those chains were triggered. Okay. So the last thing I'm going to look at is macros. So in order to do that, I'm going to actually undo isn't going to do it for us this time, is it? So I'm going to have to shift select these ranges and then just make them all go back to how they were, and I'm going to press stop all clips. Alright, so our key ranges have gone back to normal, velocity and chain has all gone back to normal, so we can hide. Okay, and I can just trigger the synth with either a MIDI clip, or I'm triggering it with my QWERTY keyboard at the minute, because I have this option switched on. I usually forget the name of that option, so let's go to View and Info. So we've got this info view down here, and just hover over it. Computer MIDI keyboard, that's what it's called. And when you've got that switched on, you can play the synths with your computer keyboard. Right, now let's get rid of info again. Okay, so I want to look at macros. So 3 buttons here. One shows and hides devices on the chains. One shows and hides the chain list. And this one shows and hides macro controls. And macro controls are a great way for us to manipulate multiple parameters simultaneously. What does that mean? Well, I'll show you. Let's solo this first, and I tell you what, we'll simplify things by turning off the chord and the arpeggiator MIDI effects, so we just get this, the default analog sound with a bit of chorus. Alright, sounds quite nice if I move the filter cut off, so let's try that. I also like that. Okay, so wouldn't it be great if I could modulate those 2 parameters with the same control, so I don't have to go in 2 places to change them? Well, we can do that with macros. So we've got 8 macros in an instrument rack, and the way that we can achieve what we're trying to achieve is to press the map button and to choose our filter cutoff and map it to macro 1. Okay, so now we see various things have changed. First of all, let's look over here at the parameter. This is now being controlled by a macro, and we know that because we've got this little green dot next to it. By the way, everything that goes green, every parameter that goes green, you can map to a macro control. It's also got this F1 freak title on it, and that relates to the title of the macro. It can be slightly confusing because basically what has happened is the macro has inherited the name of this parameter when we mapped it. That's not going to last very long though, because we're going to change the name of the macro. Can I do it up here? No, I can't do it up here. I tell you what, we don't need to worry about doing it now because I can Command and R and change it back to macro 1 if I want. But I've just changed the name. It's still mapped to this parameter. Let's come out of mapping mode and just show how this works. Yep, so I'm moving this macro 1 control here, and because we've mapped it to this parameter, the parameter moves. But we wanted to move 2 parameters simultaneously. Well, we go into map mode again, we select the parameter. Is that parameter selected? Let's see. No, it isn't. So I'm going to have to come out of map mode and find. This is what I'm looking for, isn't it? It was the rate control, wasn't it? I was moving the rate right and left. So again, let's go into map mode. Let's select the parameter that we want. It was rate, and let's map it to macro 1. So now look at here, up here in the macro mappings list. Let me just zoom in. We've got a column which shows which macro we're dealing with, what the path is, and the path basically shows you the device, the name of the parameter, and these minimum and maximum ranges. So if we, first of all, I'll tell you what, let's just move the macro control and show that this works. Yeah, so both parameters are moving at the same time. As the frequency cutoff increases, their modulation rate increases as well. Well, that's fine, but actually, you know, really what I want to do is I want to reverse that so that the rate has an inverse relationship to the frequency cutoff, the filter cutoff. If we go back to map, we can do that. We can right click on this second mapping and invert range. Now, if you pay close attention to the minimum and maximum controls, tell you what, it's inverted one more time. By default, the minimum will be the lowest possible value, and the maximum will be the highest possible value, but we can right click and invert range. So now what will happen is they will move in opposite ways. All right, so as the filter cutoff decreases, the modulation rate increases, and vice versa. And of course, you can also set a specific range. So what I'm going to do now, just to show this, for it to make a little bit more sense, is I'm going to select the chorus mapping that we did and just delete it. So now we've only have one parameter mapped to macro 1, which is the filter frequency, and I just want to show you that we can set the minimum and maximum range to be anything that we want. So I might want the filter cutoff to never go below, let's see, can I type it in? 300 Hertz. Yeah. So I never want the filter cutoff to go below 300 Hertz, and I don't want it to go above, say, there, 10.2. Or what that means is, if we come out of here, when this dial, this control is at its very far left, this parameter will be 300 Hertz. When it's at its very far right, as high as it'll go, this will be 10.2. So what we've done is we've restricted the range there. So it no longer goes between 0 Hertz and I think it was 22K. It only goes between 300 and 10.2. That's quite good for performance, because when you're performing, particularly if you MIDI map these controls to physical controllers, you might not want to be ever so detailed with where you position your controller. You might just want to snap it to the left and snap it to the right. Okay, so You've got 8 macro controls. You can map individual macros to as many parameters as you want. We've just done 2 there, but really there is a lot of scope with macro controls. So have fun with them and let me know how you get on.